They picked the wrong man. It was just after 10 p.m. in Brookwood Park, where the city softened into silence and the shadows stretched longer under the old iron lamps. A man walked alone with a black leash in hand. At the other end of it, a Belgian Malinois trotted quietly, his ears perked, constantly scanning. There was something in the dog's posture that suggested he wasn't just a pet. And something about the man, the way he moved, the way he watched without being obvious, that should have made anyone think twice. But they didn't. 4 of them. Hooded, armed, cocky. They'd been watching him from the edge of the trail, nestled near the tree line behind the old fountain. To them it was routine. A man walking his dog, designer coat, Rolex glinting under the street lamp. Easy mark. They moved as one. 2 approached head-on, the others flanked wide. Casual but coordinated, the way street-trained jackals hunted. One pulled a pistol from his waistband and pointed it at the dog. Wallet, watch, keys, leave the leash. The man didn't move, not a twitch. He didn't flinch, didn't even raise an eyebrow. The dog let out a low, rumbling growl, moving half a step closer to his master. The one with the gun sneered. I said... The shot was loud, echoing between the empty trees. The dog dropped instantly, yelping once, then still. A puff of white breath left the man's mouth, slow, controlled. 3 of the 4 burst out laughing, one even clapping like he'd just watched a prank go perfectly. The 4th, the youngest, looked uncomfortable, glancing between the body of the dog and the man's face. Something about the way he was standing, not stunned, not afraid, still. Yo, grab his stuff and let's bounce. The youngest moved forward, hand out for the wallet. The man handed it over. His voice was quiet, flat, almost like he was commenting on the weather. What's your name? The kid blinked, confused. What? I asked for your name. You serious? He looked back at his crew, half laughing. Dude, this guy's asking for my name. I want to know what to write on the marker, the man said. What marker? The one I'll bury you under. The kid froze. The man took one slow step forward. Just one. That's all it took. The kid stumbled backward like he'd seen something he couldn't understand. The others shouted, cursed, called the man crazy. They got back in the SUV, laughing again, shouting something about how he's not worth the bullet. Tires screeched. Taillights faded into the distance. Silence returned to the park. The man kneeled next to the dog's body. Blood had begun to darken the grass beneath him. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just placed one hand on the dog's head and held it there for a long, still moment. The city moved on, but something in him shifted. He picked up the collar, still warm, and stood. The leash stayed wrapped in his hand. The man walked home in silence, leaving behind a trail that no one would notice. But the next time anyone saw him, there would be blood. They thought they got away with it. They thought he'd grieve, hide, report it, and wait for justice that would never come. But he wasn't just some man with a watch and a fancy coat. He was Keanu Reeves, and they'd just woken something he had spent years trying to bury, something that had once terrified governments. They took his dog, and in doing so, they signed their own death certificates. The house was silent when he got home. Not the kind of peaceful silence you settle into, but the heavy, suffocating kind that wraps around your ribs and refuses to let go. Keanu stepped inside and closed the door behind him without locking it. He didn't need to anymore. Every light stayed off. He moved through the space by memory, barely brushing against the edge of a table, his steps slow and deliberate. In the corner, the dog bed sat untouched, still slightly indented from Archer's last nap. A chewed rubber ball was next to it, silent now, the faintest smear of dried mud on the hardwood floor. Keanu sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the leash in his hand. His thumb ran along the stitching. He remembered every mark, every fray. He had repaired it himself, twice. He didn't remember how long he sat there, motionless, with nothing but the ticking of the old analog clock echoing in the room. Then he stood up. He walked to the hallway closet, opened it and pulled the coats aside. The back panel was plain drywall, most would miss it, but he reached underneath and felt for the old metal latch, buried behind the studs. With a twist and a pull, the panel popped open, a narrow storage space, barely 3 feet wide. At the back, on a small reinforced shelf, sat a matte black metal case. It was covered in a fine layer of dust. He hadn't touched it in years, not since he decided to stop being what he once was. He stared at it for a moment, fingers hovering just above the latch. Then, slowly, he opened it. The foam lining inside cradled the tools like a coffin does a body. 2 custom 9mm pistols with threaded barrels for silencers, 3 loaded magazines, a folding carambit with a bone handle, a burner phone, off but fully charged, a ring, small, simple, and old, not worn for years. He ran his fingers over the weapons like he was waking them up from sleep. He had tried to walk away. He had left it all behind. The contracts, the identities, the names burned off passports. He had learned to live in the daylight, to sip coffee in public without scanning every face in the room, to breathe. But they killed Archer, and in doing so, they pulled the pin on something that had once been lethal, and still was. He took the pistols and holstered them with practiced efficiency. Muscle memory returned like it had never left. His body still knew how to move, how to kill. He slipped the karambit into his belt and closed the case, locking it behind him. Then he sat at the kitchen table and turned on the burner phone. The screen flickered. 1 number saved under "only if," no name, just those words. He pressed call. It rang once, twice, then click. A voice answered, calm, grizzled, familiar. "You never call this line." "I need a car," Keanu said. Silence. "Is it done?" "They killed my dog." Another pause, this time longer. Then the voice spoke again. "Where are you?" He gave an address. Just an alley off 5th Street. Nothing more. Then he ended the call. He didn't need to explain. Anyone who knew him, anyone from that world, would understand. This wasn't about vengeance, not really. This was about balance, about answering violence with precision, a response not driven by emotion, but by code. Someone had broken the code. And now the world would be reminded that Keanu Reeves wasn't a myth. He was a man with nothing left to lose. And that made him more dangerous than he'd ever been. He grabbed his coat and stepped into the night. The leash still hung from his hand, wrapped tightly around his knuckles like a promise. By morning, someone would be dead. And by the end of the week, the streets would remember the name they had forgotten, and wish they hadn't. The alley smelled like oil and rain. Steam hissed from a nearby vent as Keanu stood beneath a flickering street lamp, the leash still wrapped tight in his hand like a rosary of war. His coat clung to him in the cold air, collar up, shadow hiding his face. 3 minutes after he arrived, headlights cut through the alley's mouth. A black sedan rolled in, slow and cautious. Bulletproof glass, reinforced frame, not a rental. The driver stepped out, tall, lean, wearing gloves. His face looked older than Keanu remembered. More lines around the eyes, more weight behind the silence. But the recognition was instant. Wells. Keanu gave a small nod. That was all it took. Wells opened the back door, then moved to the trunk without saying a word. Inside was a tactical duffel, already packed. Body armor, ammo, extra mags. A phone with encrypted messaging, a new ID, and a fresh set of plates. Wells had always been a step ahead. That's why Keanu trusted him. As Keanu slid into the back seat, Wells shut the door, got behind the wheel, and drove. The city passed by in silence. The usual lights, the late-night traffic, but everything felt different now. Every street corner looked like a checkpoint, every face a target. Keanu broke the silence. "I need names." Wells didn't ask why. He already knew. "You heard about the incident?" he asked, eyes still on the road. "I lived it." Wells exhaled sharply. 4 guys, black SUV. Park job gone wrong, they said. Some think it was a message to someone else, but they picked you. Not a message, just amateurs. Amateurs don't walk away from something like that. Not for long. Wells nodded. One of them's already dead. Keanu didn't answer. He didn't need to. They hit a bar after, downtown. Guy bragged about putting a bullet in a dog. Said the guy didn't even flinch, like he didn't care. Keanu's jaw flexed. Where are the others? Wells took a sharp right into a parking garage. 2 levels down, behind a locked steel door, sat what looked like a boiler room, but was actually an old safe house. Bare walls, fluorescent light, table, 1 chair, and a tablet, already open, a photo on the screen. The shooter, mid-20s, tattoos on his hands, chain around his neck with a fang-shaped pendant. Name's Crispy, Wells said. Real name, Christian Vega, dumb nickname from his crew. Iron Fangs, half street punks, half clout chasers. They don't run things, but they do jobs for people who do. Keanu studied the face, memorized it, burned it into his mind. Where is he now? Wells tapped the screen. That's the club he was last seen at. Private table. Throwing money around like he just won the lottery. He's got backup. 2 more from the crew, maybe a girl. They're celebrating like it's their last night alive. It is. Wells hesitated. You sure you're ready for this? Keanu met his gaze. I was ready the moment the leash hit the ground. He reached for the gear on the table, loaded magazines into his vest, checked the blade, slid the pistol into his side holster with a click that echoed too loud for the room. This club. Security? Front's tight, private guards, no colors inside, but back alley's soft. 1 guard, sometimes none. Rear service door. If you time it with the kitchen delivery, I won't need long. Wells gave him one last look. Not fearful, not worried, just quiet respect. You walk into that place, you don't walk out clean. Keanu tightened the gloves on his hands. I'm not here to stay clean. The ride to the club was short, but the weight in Keanu's chest made it feel like miles. Outside, music thumped through the walls, a heartbeat too loud to ignore. The entrance was lined with velvet ropes and men with earpieces, bottles and stilettos, laughter and lies. Keanu didn't care about any of it. He slipped down the side alley, moving past the dumpsters to the rear door. Just as Wells said, 1 guard, half asleep, scrolling through his phone. Keanu was on him in 3 steps, a strike to the neck dropping him silently. He caught the body before it hit the ground. The door creaked open. A wave of heat and kitchen noise spilled out. He moved fast, down the service hall, through the swinging door, past staff who barely registered him. The club's heartbeat got louder. Red lights, smoke, drinks spilled on the floor. A crowd pulsed in slow motion. He didn't stop to take it in. He saw the VIP booth instantly. 3 men, 1 woman, champagne bottle on the table. One of them wore a chain with a fang-shaped pendant. Keanu walked toward them, every step deliberate. 1 hand under his coat, gripping steel, eyes locked on the man who pulled the trigger. The guy spotted him halfway across the floor. Confusion, then recognition, then fear. Keanu didn't say a word. He reached into his pocket and tossed something on the table. It landed with a soft clink. Archer's dog tag. The woman screamed. The man reached for his waistband. Too late. 2 shots. Clean. Controlled. The shooter dropped sideways, still gripping air. One of his friends stood frozen. The other went for a weapon. Keanu turned, stepped left, fired again. A 3rd body hit the floor. People screamed. The music stopped. Keanu was already moving. He was gone before security even made it past the bar. Back in the alley, he didn't run. He just walked. This wasn't the end. This wasn't even revenge. This was a message. And the city would hear it, 1 name at a time. The club was in flames, not literal ones, but the kind of aftermath that burned through every layer of protection. 3 bodies dead in a VIP booth, one of them a known enforcer with ties to the Iron Fangs. No one saw who did it, no face, no footage, just an empty space where a man once sat, a dog tag on the table, and a bullet hole where his eye used to be. The headlines didn't reach the truth. The security guards gave confused statements. Some said it was a robbery. Others claimed the killer was invisible. Police came and went, already half-bribed and disinterested. But the people who mattered, the ones who moved weight and cleaned blood before the city even woke up, they understood. This wasn't random. This was a message from someone who didn't ask permission, and someone who didn't stop. Across the city, in a dilapidated apartment above a pawn shop, the remaining 2 members of the park crew were arguing. One paced. One sat with his head in his hands. "I told you," the one sitting said, voice shaking. "I told you that guy looked wrong. His eyes, man. He didn't even move when Crispy shot the dog." The other punched the wall. It was just a dog. Number it wasn't. They both froze when the knock came. 3 sharp taps. Not loud, not hurried. Just precise. They stared at the door. The pacing one grabbed a pistol from the counter and whispered, "You expecting anyone?" "No." The knock came again. This time, just 2 taps. The lights flickered. The door blew open. By the time they registered the figure stepping through the smoke, it was already too late. The first one fired. 3 shots. All missed. Keanu didn't. He moved like a memory, fast, cold, impossible to predict. A hard elbow crushed one man's throat before he could scream. The other tried to run, got 1 foot into the hallway before Keanu's blade found his back. He collapsed halfway through the doorframe, gasping. Keanu stood over him, calm. "I gave your friend a chance to answer," he said quietly. "You get one too." The man's voice came out between coughs. "It was a job. That's it. Just a job." "Who ordered it?" "I don't know. They said some guy wanted the dog dead, said he was tired of seeing him in the park. We thought—" "You thought you'd kill a man's dog, take his things, and leave with your teeth." "I didn't know who you were." Keanu crouched lower. "You still don't." The blade pressed deeper. The man screamed, "Name! Give me a name!" The man's eyes darted wildly, pupils blown wide with fear. "Rojas," he breathed. "Man who gives the crew jobs. Said this one came from upstairs, like real upstairs, syndicate level." Keanu stood slowly. Rojas. That name hadn't echoed in his ears in years. He'd heard it once in a Russian bunker in Odessa, when a smuggler begged for his life. Again in Morocco, whispered in a back alley by a dying arms dealer. And now in a dirty hallway from the lips of a dying thug who didn't even understand the scale of what he'd stepped into. Rojas wasn't just a middleman. He was a handler, a coordinator of low-level chaos and high-level blood deals. But he never got his hands dirty. He outsourced them. But this time, the blood would be his. Keanu cleaned his blade and stood in the doorway, listening as the man's breathing slowed behind him. He left him alive. Not out of mercy, but because Rojas needed to know someone was coming, and fear spreads faster when it comes from someone who lives to tell about it. By sunrise, Keanu was back in the safe house. He washed the blood from his hands in the stainless steel sink, the water turning pink, then clear. Wells had stayed awake, waiting. He slid a manila folder across the table. Didn't take long to find him. The folder had one photo, Rojas, late 40s, suit too nice for the background he came from, scars on his knuckles, a long surgical one across his jaw from a machete fight in Venezuela. His last known address was stamped at the bottom, a warehouse, east side of the city, Dock 39. Keanu stared at the image for a long moment, then stood. "You going tonight?" Wells asked. "No." Wells raised a brow. "Why wait?" Keanu looked up, eyes flat. "Because I want him to feel it." He left the safe house and went to a place he hadn't been in years, a rusted-out storage unit 2 counties away. Inside was a single object, a box labeled Archer. Inside the box, a collar, a photo, and a vial. He took the photo out, set it on the dashboard of the car, and stared at it. "You kept me human," he whispered. The car pulled out onto the road. No music, no lights, just silence, and the sound of death getting closer. The streets knew something was wrong. You could feel it in the way people moved, slower, cautious, like the wind carried whispers of something they didn't understand. The city hadn't changed, but the energy had, because someone was hunting again, and the people who knew what that meant had already started packing bags, making calls, clearing hard drives. Word had spread fast. 2 of the Iron Fangs were dead. A third disappeared, and the fourth, the one who pulled the trigger, left behind a corpse in a booth and a pool of his own blood that club security couldn't mop up fast enough. All of them were involved in the same incident. All of them were ghosts now. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no evidence, except a dog tag. That was the part that rattled everyone. The quiet message behind the violence, not a warning, not a calling card, something deeper, personal. Rojas got the message, and he didn't sleep that night. He doubled his security, moved locations, burned phones, erased every tie he could to the Iron Fangs. But no matter how many shadows he ran to, he knew it wasn't enough. He'd heard stories about men like Keanu, operatives without files, contractors who existed only in rumors. Whispers said Keanu had been on every continent, that he could disappear inside your own house before you even knew he was there, that he'd been dead once, or worse, he had chosen to come back. Rojas didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in men who'd seen too much and had nothing left to lose, so he ran. But Keanu didn't chase right away. He waited, watched, listened, because the point wasn't just to find Rojas. The point was to unravel him. Wells tracked every move, every burner phone ping, every van that left the docks under fake shipping manifests. He tapped into old channels, paid favors that were better left untouched, and sent encrypted signals to ex-informants who hadn't heard Keanu's name in years. The responses were immediate. People weren't just afraid, they were terrified. Because if Keanu Reeves was active again, it meant someone had done something unforgivable, and everyone in that world was asking the same question: who the hell killed his dog? Wells finally handed Keanu the answer he was waiting for. A folder, simple, unmarked. Inside, a single line of intel, a convoy. 3 black SUVs moving through the East Corridor near Dock 39. No license plates, bulletproof glass. One of the vehicles had Rojas inside. Confirmed. He was moving product, or hiding behind it. Keanu didn't wait for nightfall. He geared up, not loud, not bulky, nothing that slowed him down. He wore weight like silence. He slipped into the city's veins and waited for the heart to beat once more. The convoy moved just after 4 p.m., taking the industrial bypass most civilians never used. Warehouses on one side, cranes on the other. The kind of place where no one asked questions and people got paid to look away. But not everyone looked away. Keanu was already there. The second the SUVs turned the corner, he moved. Not toward them, around them. He set a charge 2 hours earlier on the northbound rail line, a small explosion. Nothing lethal, just enough to send panic into the lead vehicle, just enough to make them stop. And they did. The convoy halted. Doors opened. Men stepped out, scanning the area, rifles raised, shouting, cursing. One of them screamed for someone to call backup. That was the moment. A whisper of movement behind the third SUV. A flash of shadow. The guard in the back turned around too late. A blade slid between ribs, fast and clean. He dropped, and Keanu caught him before the body hit the pavement. One down. Keanu moved to the second SUV, shot out the back tire with a suppressed round. The vehicle dipped, tilted. The driver panicked and tried to back up, slamming into the lead car. Chaos. Keanu was already gone. Another man tried to radio in. Didn't finish the sentence before a bullet tore through his earpiece and into his skull. They didn't know where the shots were coming from. Didn't know how many there were. Didn't realize there was only one. Rojas stayed in the third car, crouched low, sweating bullets. "Who is it?" he screamed at his driver. "Who the fuck is hitting us?" But his driver couldn't answer, because the driver's throat had just been opened by a man who appeared out of the passenger side door like a phantom. Keanu pulled Rojas out of the car by the collar, dragged him into a side alley, and slammed him against the cold metal of a shipping container. Rojas reached for a pistol, but Keanu crushed his wrist against the wall until he dropped it. "Please," Rojas gasped. "It wasn't me. I didn't know." "You signed off on it," Keanu said. "I was told it was just a dog." Keanu slammed him again. "It wasn't just a dog." Rojas wheezed, spitting blood. "They told me it was a message, for someone else, just an intimidation job. We didn't know it was you. We didn't—" Keanu's knife pressed to his throat, but he didn't cut. Not yet. "Who gave the order?" "I swear I don't know his name. Just a call. Blocked. All I got was a voice and a location. Said the leash had sentimental value. Said kill the dog and someone would get the message." Keanu's voice dropped, calm as death. "You were the messenger." "I'm nobody, man. I'm just a middle. You kill me, you get nothing." Keanu stared for a long moment, then stepped back. "You're right." Rojas looked up, shocked. Keanu turned and walked away. Rojas dropped to his knees, coughing, shaking, reaching for his gun. Then heard a beeping. He looked down. A red light blinked twice under the SUV. The explosion lit up half the dockyard. The other two cars? Gone. Everything Rojas touched? Ash. And Keanu? He didn't look back. He didn't need to, because he already knew. The men who ordered the job weren't afraid of Rojas. They were afraid of what might come after him. And now they'd know. It was already here. The city didn't make a sound, but it felt louder, the kind of loud that crawls under your skin and tells you something's off, even if you can't explain why. Like when a predator enters a space and everything else, every living, breathing thing, holds still. Blackridge felt like that now. Because Rojas was gone, he didn't just vanish. He didn't retire. He didn't get scared and disappear into some private island with fake documents and a plastic surgeon. He exploded, literally. Nothing left but smoke, charred metal, and a few pieces of melted silver jewelry found near the docks. His convoy wiped out. His guards dead. No one stepped forward to claim responsibility, but everyone already knew. The syndicate wasn't a single body. It was a machine, an organism. Rojas was just a cell, easily replaced. But this wasn't about replacing him. This was about realizing someone had gotten close enough to remove him without permission. That was a problem, and problems needed solutions, so they called in someone who didn't ask questions, just handled messes before they became headlines. A man with no file, no past, and no patience. They called in Gentry Vale, 6 feet 3 inches, skin like stone, a reputation built on execution, not intimidation. Vale wasn't just muscle, he was precision, the kind of man you send not to find someone, but to end them, quietly, permanently. He was promised double his usual fee, because the target wasn't a cartel leader or a politician or some ex-sniper hiding in the hills. It was him, the man who killed the dog, Keanu Reeves. By the time they briefed Vale, Keanu was already 2 steps ahead. He knew a response was coming. Knew that removing Rojas wasn't the end, it was the invitation. The syndicate couldn't allow a statement that loud to go unanswered. It would make them look weak, vulnerable. But they'd already made a mistake. They thought Keanu was trying to make a statement. He wasn't. He was digging. And he had just found something worth pulling on. It came from a dead man's phone, recovered from one of the SUV wrecks. The screen was cracked, the battery nearly fried. But Wells managed to recover a single message. Distribution reroute confirmed. Priority cargo now moving through Pier 7. Red channel. That didn't mean much to anyone outside the loop, but to Keanu, it meant the syndicate was spooked. They were shifting their supply lines, not because they wanted to, because they had to. Priority cargo meant high stakes, weapons, drugs, money, or something worse. The red channel, that was code for the clean route. No customs, no cops, no eyes. It was time to hit them where it hurt. Wells met Keanu outside a closed-down diner on the edge of the shipping district. He handed him a file. Thin, 1 photo. Aerial drone shot of a warehouse near Pier 7. No markings, no business registry. But armed security walked the perimeter like clockwork. "This place isn't just a stash," Wells said. "It's a hub." Keanu nodded. "How many men?" 14, give or take, external and internal. I'll go quiet. You always do. He geared up inside the diner, tucked behind the counter, beneath broken neon and forgotten menus. Keanu laid out his tools. 2 pistols, suppressed, 1 folding blade, a pair of lockpicks, smoke grenades, light armor under his coat. He didn't carry more than he needed. He didn't need more than that. By 3 a.m., he was already inside the fence, moving like breath over glass. He didn't break in. He slipped in. Between blind spots, beneath security beams, past guards who'd forgotten what real danger looked like. Inside the warehouse, crates lined the walls, markings in foreign dialects, seals from companies that didn't exist. One container had the red triangle, same as the one he saw before. But this time, it was different. This time, someone was waiting. The first shot rang out just as Keanu ducked behind a forklift. Silence followed. Then footsteps. They had trip sensors, motion alarms. The syndicate had upgraded. It didn't matter. Keanu moved fast, low, 2 guards down before they ever saw him. A third tried to call out, but his throat caught steel instead of breath. Then the real one stepped in. Gentry Vale. He didn't speak. He didn't announce himself. He just walked through the rows of crates like a ghost made of bone and fire. His movements slow, deliberate, confident. Keanu saw him from 30 feet away. They locked eyes. That was the only warning. Vale opened fire, no hesitation. Every shot meant to kill, not wound. Keanu dropped behind a container, returned 2 shots, but Vale was already repositioning. This wasn't a common merc. This was someone trained to counter him. For the next 4 minutes, the warehouse became a chessboard of death. Gunfire, footsteps, shadows, silence. Vale moved with brute calculation. Keanu moved like smoke, each one testing the other's rhythm, hunting not with bullets, but with instinct. Finally, they collided, hand to hand. No weapons, just fists and fury. Vale landed the first hit, a hook like a freight train to Keanu's ribs. Keanu stumbled but didn't fall. He countered with an elbow to the throat, a knee to the sternum, a throw that sent Vale crashing into a stack of crates. But Vale smiled through the blood. "You're not just a ghost," he said. "You're a storm." Keanu didn't answer. He struck again. Harder, faster, precision born from pain. Vale faltered, reached for his pistol. Keanu kicked it away, then drove the knife in, deep. Vale's breath caught. He dropped to one knee, looked up. "You're too late," he whispered. "They've already moved it." "Moved what?" Vale coughed, smiled. "The thing that started all of this." Then his head dropped. Silence returned to the warehouse. Keanu stood over the body, chest rising and falling. He reached for Vale's radio, flipped it, listened. Static. Then a voice. "Status check. We've cleared Pier 7. Red package is in transit. Rendezvous in 30. Another voice joined in, cold, precise, familiar. "Make sure no traces left. He's coming, and he's not going to stop." Keanu crushed the radio in his fist. They were still running, still hiding. But he was done chasing shadows. He would burn through the city if he had to, because this wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about truth. And the deeper he dug, the darker it got. The night wasn't quiet anymore. It buzzed, low and angry, like a hornet's nest that had been cracked open and left to hum before it stung. Somewhere beneath that hum, between the steel and salt of the docks, something was moving, something important. Keanu didn't leave the warehouse the way he came in. He didn't need to be invisible anymore. Not tonight. The moment Gentry Vale hit the floor, bleeding out with a smile frozen on his face, Keanu knew what it meant. He hadn't just found another layer of the syndicate. He had triggered their contingency. They didn't send men like Vale unless they wanted to erase a mistake. That mistake was Keanu. And Vale's final words still echoed in his mind. "They've already moved it." Whatever it was, it mattered more than anything else the syndicate had moved before, and now it was in transit. Red package. Pier 7 cleared. Rendezvous in 30. Keanu had 25 minutes left. He stole a vehicle. Plain white van, keys still in the ignition. Probably a security patrol that wouldn't be needing it anymore. He peeled out of the lot with one hand on the wheel and the other checking the GPS mounted to the dashboard. Old, outdated, but enough to get a grid reference for every dock entrance in the lower harbor. The rendezvous point wasn't going to be marked. They'd use a ghost location, somewhere not listed, somewhere off books, but functional. Keanu didn't need maps for that. He knew how these people worked. He'd been one of them. He knew the signs. Industrial silence. No lighting on the exterior. Fewer guards, but better armed. No uniforms, just plain clothes and expensive weapons. He circled the harbor's southern edge, scanning alleys, watching shadows. Then he saw it. Pier 19. No trucks, just one nondescript cargo freighter pulled up to the edge. No names on the hull, no flags. 2 men at the entrance wore street clothes and military posture. A third man stood behind them with a clipboard, but didn't write anything down. Keanu parked the van 3 blocks away and continued on foot. He didn't walk fast. He didn't run. He moved like a man who had already chosen violence, and anyone standing between him and the truth was already gone. They just hadn't realized it yet. By the time he reached the security fence, he had already memorized their rotation. The man at the gate stepped out for a cigarette every 7 minutes. The one with the clipboard took inventory of the incoming crates but never checked the outgoing ones. And the third, he was just there to look dangerous. Keanu dropped them all in less than 90 seconds. 2 bodies hidden behind containers. 1 gagged, zip-tied, and unconscious under a stairwell. He didn't need to ask them anything. He was past questions. He just wanted eyes on the red package. The ship's cargo ramp was lowered, but not fully. Crates were being loaded by a forklift, moved in mechanical rhythm by men who didn't speak. Every container was gray, dull, and anonymous, except one. Crimson markings, black straps, a high-security seal with a glowing blue interface. That was it, the red package, but it wasn't alone. 4 guards surrounded it, each carrying a suppressed rifle and earpieces that buzzed with code phrases. Keanu crouched in the dark, heartbeat steady. He didn't wait. He moved. First guard, dropped with a blade under the ribs, dragged into shadow. Second, choked unconscious, his comms snatched and pocketed. Third, spotted Keanu's movement and raised his weapon. But Keanu had already fired. 1 clean shot through the eye. The 4th barely had time to react before Keanu's knife found his throat. Then it was just the crate and silence. He approached, holstered his weapon, and knelt beside it. The lock interface glowed blue. Fingerprint, retinal, code sequence. He pulled out a small device, a brute force breaker, one of Wells' custom tools, only had enough juice for 1 crack. He pressed it to the panel. The crate hissed. Click. Open. He lifted the lid. Inside wasn't what he expected. No cash, no weapons, no drugs, just a child. A girl, no older than 10, wrapped in a silver thermal blanket, unconscious, hooked to a monitor and IV line. Keanu stared. Something inside him twisted, deeper than rage, deeper than pain. This wasn't trafficking. This was containment. There were tracking chips on her neck, biometric sensors along her arms, and something else. Something buried just beneath her collarbone, blinking faintly red. He looked closer. A subdermal implant, military grade, biolock encryption. They weren't transporting a hostage. They were transporting a project. He reached in and gently lifted her out, careful not to disturb the IV line. Her breathing was steady, drugged but stable. Keanu's mind spun. All this death, all this blood. For her? Why? What was she? A voice crackled through the earpiece he'd stolen. Package secure. Extraction window closing. Where's the escort? Another voice answered. Familiar. Cold. We lost contact with Vale. Assume neutralized. Move to phase 2. If the package is compromised, terminate. Keanu turned to the ship. A second wave was coming, and they weren't there to recover the girl. They were there to erase her. He grabbed a flash drive from the crate, plugged into the side of the monitor, pulled it free, tucked it into his coat. Then he ran. With the girl in his arms and the truth pressed tight against his chest, he vanished into the shadows once again. Behind him, the freighter exploded, a fireball that lit the sky above Blackridge, reflected off the water like a second sun. And somewhere, watching it all unfold, the people who had started this whispered one word over and over. Mercer. They'd called him that in the old days, not an alias, a warning. He wasn't just coming for them now, he had already arrived. Blood soaked into the city's foundation long before Keanu Reeves ever came back. But now, it wasn't just seeping, it was pouring. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Explosions at the docks, gunfights echoing off shipping containers, civilians whispering about masked men bleeding in alleyways. Police reports went missing, surveillance footage mysteriously deleted, and yet the name that kept floating to the surface was the one no one wanted to say out loud. Mercer. It wasn't just a name, it was a signal. To run, to vanish, to tie up your affairs and pray you weren't already on the list, because Mercer didn't warn. He ended. Keanu moved through the streets like a ghost, carrying the girl through back alleys and blind turns, never staying on camera, never repeating a route. He didn't know her name. She hadn't woken up yet. Whatever drug they used on her, it was designed to keep her under. But her breathing was steady, and her pulse was strong. She wasn't dying. They just didn't want her awake. And that told him everything. She wasn't cargo. She was the key. Wells met him in an underground garage near the water plant. No questions asked. Just popped the trunk, opened the emergency med kit, and began scanning the girl. Keanu watched every move. She's got a subdermal tracker, Wells muttered. That blinking light under her collarbone, biometric signature keyed to a specific frequency. But there's something else, something deeper. What? Wells looked up, eyes tense. She's tagged with a failsafe. Keanu's jaw tightened. A bomb? Not exactly. A neural kill switch. Military-level neural suppressant. If she hits a certain biometric trigger, if she gets too far from the syndicate's grid or too close to someone they've flagged, she doesn't die. She forgets. Wiped clean, like she never existed. Keanu stepped back, silent. Wells closed the kit. This isn't human trafficking. This is asset control. They're not just moving product. They're growing it. He handed Keanu the flash drive recovered from the crate. I cracked part of it. It's coded to a black site lab in Slovakia. But that's just a front. The deeper files, they reference something called Program Echo, medical experiments, neural imprinting, sleeper activation protocols. Not military, not CIA. This is private, syndicate-owned. Keanu's voice was low. She was made for something, or into something, Wells replied. There was a pause, a long, heavy one. Then Keanu said, we need to wake her up. Wells gave a hard look. You sure? Whatever they did to her, once it starts unraveling, there's no going back. She deserves to know, Keanu said. She deserves to remember. Wells nodded. Then we'll need help. They drove across the city, sticking to shadows, back routes, and service tunnels. Eventually, they arrived at a medical lab disguised as an old dentist's office. The lights were dim. The walls smelled of sterilized equipment and secrets. Inside, a woman waited. Her name was Dr. Maylin Rowe. She didn't ask how Keanu got involved. She didn't flinch when she saw the girl. She just got to work. It took 4 hours. Monitors, neural scans, a soft hum from a specialized device Wells had lifted from a private contractor in Berlin years ago. Rowe worked silently, sweat on her brow, hands steady. Then at last the girl opened her eyes, big, brown, confused. She looked around, blinking rapidly, and whispered one word. Kira. Keanu stepped forward. That your name?" She nodded slowly, eyes locking on his. "You were the one in the dark." He crouched beside her. "You remember that?" "I remember everything." That wasn't supposed to happen, not with a neural kill switch in place. Wells looked at Roe. "She beat it?" Roe shook her head. "Number, it's still there, but it's unstable. Whoever programmed her, they made a mistake, or she's stronger than they planned." Keanu turned back to the girl. "Kira, do you know why they were moving you?" She didn't answer right away. Her face was still. Then she said, "They said I was a weapon, but I didn't feel like one." Wells cursed under his breath. Keanu's voice dropped. "Do you know who they are?" Kira nodded. "They live in the glass building, the one that touches the sky. That's where they watched me sleep." Keanu knew exactly what she meant. Black Ridge Tower. The Syndicate's heart. 36 stories of glass, steel, and lies. Private guards, hidden bunkers, panic rooms. Only the highest-ranking members ever got inside. And now Keanu had a reason to walk through the front door. Wells looked uneasy. "You go in there. You're declaring war." "I already did." "They'll have eyes on every entrance." "Then I'll give them something to watch." Rose stepped in. "She can't go with you. She's still unstable. One wrong signal and she shuts down. I'll keep her hidden." Keanu knelt beside Kira. "You remember who I am?" She nodded. "You stay with them. I'm going to find out who did this to you." She didn't cry. She just said, "Don't let them put me back to sleep." Keanu stood, nodded once, and walked out into the night. He didn't need more intel. He didn't need backup. All he needed was an address. Black Ridge Tower, 36 floors, and someone on the top one had answers. He wasn't coming for vengeance anymore. He was coming for truth, and he'd burn the entire building down to get it. The rain started falling just before midnight, sharp, cold needles tearing through the air as if the sky itself wanted to wash the city clean. But Blackridge wasn't the kind of place that got clean. It didn't care about storms. It had learned to hide its dirt under marble floors and designer suits, and at the center of it all, standing like a monument to power and secrecy, was Blackridge Tower. 36 stories of steel and glass, lit windows pulsing like a heartbeat. The lobby ran 24 hours, but only the top floors mattered. No company logos, no directories, just unlisted names, hidden floors, and silent guards who didn't carry badges, only weapons. Keanu stood across the street, watching. He wasn't wearing armor, no vest, no helmet. He didn't need protection. He was the danger, a ghost with purpose. He walked across the street through the rain, hood down, coat heavy with weight. Not from water, but from everything underneath it. 2 pistols, 1 blade, 3 extra mags, a burner phone rigged with an EMP burst. No backup, no escape plan, just a name. Vincent Holloway, the man on top, the man who made the call, the man who said the dog didn't matter. Keanu stepped into the lobby. Polished floors, marble columns, security behind sleek glass panels, a receptionist who didn't flinch at the sight of him. She'd been trained not to. 2 guards at the elevator, dressed in black, armed but bored. He walked straight to the desk. The receptionist smiled. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yes," he said. "You can tell Holloway Mercer's here." Her fingers froze over the keyboard. The name meant something. One of the guards shifted. The other reached for his earpiece. Keanu was already moving. 3 shots. Silent, clean. The first dropped before he got his hand to his holster. The second didn't even scream. The receptionist ducked behind the desk as blood sprayed across the marble. Keanu stepped over the bodies and swiped a security badge from the nearest corpse. He hit the elevator panel, slid the badge, and selected the top floor. Penthouse. No buttons below it worked anymore. The doors closed with a soft chime, and the ride began. 36 floors in silence. He could feel the shift in the air the higher he climbed. Cleaner, colder, filtered for people who didn't breathe the same air as the rest of the world. When the elevator dinged, he drew his weapon and stepped out. No red carpet, no article, just a hallway made of black stone. Walls lined with panels that looked like glass but were reinforced to stop .50 caliber rounds. And at the end of the hall, a pair of double doors. Keanu didn't knock. He walked forward, kicked the door in, and stepped into a room soaked in artificial calm. Glass walls, city lights stretching out like a galaxy, a long table in the middle, 2 guards on either side, and at the far end, standing with a glass of whiskey, was Holloway. He didn't look surprised. "I thought you might show up tonight," he said. Keanu said nothing. Holloway gestured with his glass. "I should thank you. Rojas was getting sloppy. The Iron Fangs were a joke. You cleaned house. Efficiently." Keanu raised the pistol. The 2 guards drew. 2 shots. Both went down. Holloway didn't blink. "You won't shoot me, Mercer. Not yet. You want answers." Keanu stepped closer. "I want everything." Holloway smirked. "Then sit." Keanu didn't sit, but he didn't shoot either. So Holloway talked. "The girl, Kira, she was never meant to reach the surface. She's part of a prototype line. Artificial memory layering. You implant a personality, then overwrite it. Train a weapon, then bury it in a child. Nobody suspects a child." "She's not a weapon," Keanu said. "Not yet," Holloway replied. "But she would have been, if they hadn't assigned her to you." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "What?" "Project Echo. You weren't just a target. You were the final test. The dog was the trigger. Your retaliation was the response. They watched everything, measured it, tracked every bullet you fired." Keanu's grip tightened. "They used her to get to me?" "They wanted to know if ghosts still bled," Holloway said. "They wanted to know if the Mercer protocol could be reactivated, and guess what? It could." Keanu fired, not to kill, to maim. The bullet tore through Holloway's thigh. He dropped, blood soaking into his expensive suit. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "They're bigger than me. I was just a middle, a face. They're global. You're one man." "I'm the wrong man," Keanu said. Holloway laughed, coughed. "You want names? Look in that drawer. Desk on the right. Codes 0901. Everything you need. Accounts, command structure, black site locations. But it won't save her." Keanu moved to the desk, opened the drawer, pulled out a folder marked ECHO-ACTIVE. Inside were photos. Dozens of them, not just Kira, others, boys, girls, adults, test subjects, failed attempts, psychological profiles, brain scans, projected uses, infiltration, manipulation, assassination. And on the last page, a countdown. Activation window, 7 days. Then a line in red ink. If Mercer reaches her before protocol completion, deploy cleaners. Keanu turned slowly. "I reached her," he said. "Then they're coming," Holloway whispered, "and they won't stop." Keanu raised his pistol one more time. This time there was no hesitation. One shot, no more Holloway, no more middleman, only war. He left the penthouse without looking back. The elevator ride down was slower, not because of the machine, but because of the weight. The war had always been coming. He just didn't realize it would wear a child's face. And now that she had a name, they had a reason to fear him again. Rain hammered the street like war drums. Somewhere behind the city's quiet skyline, the syndicate was waking up, not in panic, not in chaos, but in calculation. Vincent Holloway was dead, and the Mercer protocol was live. They never expected him to survive the first wave, never planned for Rojas to disappear without trace, never anticipated Gentry Vale to fall in a warehouse soaked with his own blood. They believed Keanu would burn out fast, die loud, die messy. Instead, he did what ghosts do. He vanished. And now he was back, with blood on his hands and something more dangerous than vengeance in his heart. Purpose. They tried to bury it beneath lies, science, money, and blood. But it clawed its way out. And it had a name, Kira. Keanu didn't return to the safe house that night. Too risky, too exposed. The moment Holloway's heart stopped beating, the chain reaction began. The files he found, names, locations, accounts, they weren't just intel. They were landmines. As soon as he cracked the drawer, the network was alerted. And now they were moving. The cleaners. Wells called it the worst-case scenario. He wasn't wrong. The cleaners weren't enforcers. They weren't hitters or soldiers. They were erasure agents, people who didn't clean up the blood. They cleaned up the idea that blood had ever been spilled. If they were mobilized, it meant the syndicate was done playing containment. They were preparing to rewrite the narrative, erase Kira, erase Mercer, erase the entire trail of what Project Echo had ever been. Keanu moved through the drainage tunnels beneath Blackridge, following lines in concrete that only he knew how to read. Decades of forgotten infrastructure made for the perfect hiding place. He slipped between light and shadow, silence and sound. By sunrise, he reached the fallback location. Wells was already there, holed up in the back of a derelict train station with Dr. Rowe and Kira. The girl was curled up on an old army cot, asleep, but breathing steady. The sedatives were wearing off. Her mind was adjusting to the reactivation. No seizures, no glitches, but that wouldn't last forever. Keanu stepped in, dripping rainwater, and dropped the folder onto the table beside Wells. "They're coming," he said. Wells flipped through the files. Names, black sites, transfer logs, genetic sequencing codes, and at the very bottom, a location marked WYRM. He stopped cold. "This isn't in the city," Wells said. "This is in the mountains, 30 miles west. Cold territory, off-grid. They built it into the side of a cliff, only one way in, one way out." Keanu stared. "It's the source." Wells nodded. "It's where the program started, and it's where they're hiding the failsafe." Rowe leaned forward. "The kill protocol? You think they'd store it there?" "I think it's where they built her," Keanu said, eyes locked on Kira. "It's where they'll go to destroy the evidence." Wells looked up. "You're not going there alone." Keanu didn't blink. "I'm not asking. I wasn't offering." By nightfall, the team was packed. Rowe stayed behind with Kira, relocating to a mobile med unit on the edge of the next county. Wells and Keanu took the old supply truck, armored, quiet, built to take a hit and keep going. They loaded everything they needed: suppressed rifles, breaching tools, explosives, old field gear from a war that never officially existed. They didn't speak much on the way. There was nothing left to say. The road to Worm facility was cut through ancient forest, the kind of terrain GPS never mapped properly. Snow fell lightly, melting into slush beneath the tires. Trees creaked. Animals fled before the truck even passed. At the top of the trail was a gate that didn't look like one, just a steel wall half buried in rock. And beside it, a keypad. Wells raised an eyebrow. "You really think that code still works?" Keanu didn't answer. He typed in 4 numbers. The door hissed and opened. Inside was dark, not abandoned, but sleeping. Backup power, minimal lights, a hum so low it felt more like a heartbeat. The walls were steel, the floors smooth concrete. The air smelled sterile and old. They moved fast. 2 floors down, past rows of dormant labs, cryogenic tanks, empty containment cells, then files, stacked, stamped, sealed in coded drawers, every one of them marked with the same insignia. Keanu didn't stop for them. He knew what he was looking for: the central core, the heart of the facility, where the cleaners would go to execute the purge. The closer they got, the more resistance they met. 2 guards at the first checkpoint, dead before they knew he was there. 4 more deeper in, more trained, but not enough. The cleaners hadn't expected him to come here first, but one of them waited. Not in a hallway, in the control room. She was older than he expected, calm, cold, dressed in tactical black, with the composure of someone who'd ended entire bloodlines and slept well after. "Mercer," she said. like greeting an old friend. They said you wouldn't come. I said you would. Keanu didn't raise his gun yet. You know what this place is. I built it, she said. Echo was never about control. It was about evolution. Kira was the first who didn't break. You should be proud. She modeled her resistance after you. Keanu's hand twitched. And now you're here to wipe it all away. She smiled faintly. Not wipe, archive, then restart. You'll never touch her. She's already triggered Mercer. She's counting down, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. He pulled the flash drive from his pocket. Holloway's data. He tossed it on the table in front of her. You're wrong. She glanced at it, and that's when Wells fired. One shot. Clean. She dropped without a sound. Keanu stepped over her body and plugged the drive into the mainframe. He didn't just pull the plug, he detonated the whole system. Code, backups, remote access points, burned, gone. The countdown ended. Kira was free. No more program. No more protocol, just a girl. Outside, the wind screamed through the trees like the forest itself knew something had changed. The facility began to shake as the last charge went off, imploding the lab from the inside. Keanu and Wells walked through fire and steel, through smoke and silence, and stepped out into the snow just as the last wall fell. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. It was over, not the war, but the experiment. Kira would live, and they would never try again. Because the cost of awakening Keanu Reeves was everything, and he'd made sure the world would never forget it.